Hello and welcome everyone to our latest webinar. So today we're going to discuss about how you can accelerate technical sales using self-service demos. So I'll be your host. My name is Pascal Joly, and I'm the Director of Technology Partnerships here at Quali, and I'm glad to have today a guest speaker, Matt, who is a lab service engineer at Broadcom and as well an automation guru. Matt?
Thanks for having me.
All right. So we have a pretty packed agenda, and after going over a few introduction on the context of this presentation and the challenges, we'll discuss about a case study, and Matt will discuss about their experience using self-service demo cloud at Broadcom. And finally, we'll do a demo as well, and we'll wrap up with Q&A. So just a few logistic items here. If you have any questions during the course of this webinar, you have a way to do that using your screen and ask, and at the end we'll make sure that we'll cover as many of those as possible. So just a quick introduction about Quali. We're a private company, venture-funded startup, and we focus on cloud automation and orchestration. And our core platform is called CloudShell, and it delivers. We deliver cloud sandboxes, which are really replica of production environment that can be used in a variety of use cases, such as demo POCs that we're going to talk about today at length. And we have about over 150 Fortune 500 customers, including a number of large technology companies such as Broadcom. So just to get started here, I wanted to discuss about quickly what is the life cycle of a demo POC. And so the clock really starts clicking when once you have scheduled the demo with the customer. And after this, you have to make sure that everything marches towards the time where you're up and running and you're ready to run a successful demo that will hopefully convince the customer to close the deal. And so what happens in between are a number of steps that include defining, of course, the scope of the POC, preparing any equipment that you would have to send out and ship out to the customer if you're a hardware vendor, organize the shipping, set up and configure, and that includes set up and configure not only hardware but also virtual machines if you're going to use virtual machines as part of your demo. And finally, when you're up to that point, you can run your demo, and after the demo, it doesn't end there, because you have to obviously tear it down, make sure that if you had any hardware, you ship it back, and then move on to the next POC. So given all the stress that can happen during the cycle of this demo POC, eventually we all know and we all learn that anything that could go wrong will go wrong, and we have to be prepared to expect the unexpected. So for instance, when you have to first get an equipment for a demo, this equipment may not be available because another sales team is using it. So then you have to wait and maybe reschedule your POC, which is always a difficult thing to do. Other delays can be occurring because eventually you get the hold on that piece of equipment, but then there's shipping time and equipment get lost along the way, additional costs that could occur because of you want to expedite things, And finally, when the equipment is finally there on customer site, you have to do some manual configuration to get it up and running, and this, of course, is very error-prone. Finally, you get an equipment to the customer, and then the customer says, "Oh, I want to try it out for a little while, a little while longer," and eventually you just forget about it, and you end up with some assets that are sort of distributed and end up never being returned to the customer. And then, given the number of equipment that you can actually share between multiple teams, you only have a limited number of demos that your team can run, given the fact that one equipment can only be at one customer site at any given time. And finally, all of a sudden, you have a really high priority customer POC that shows up in the pipeline, and everything gets interrupted, and you have to kind of send your equipment over to a different site or reallocate resources, and this could be very disruptive. So let's discuss about more in details some of the different axes of tension when you want to have place this demo lab. And here I'm talking about a range of possibilities that, for instance, if you consider the usability versus flexibility, you want your demo lab to be as easy to use as possible, and as such provide a self-service catalog. But on the other hand, you want this lab to be and this lab solution to be very flexible, because you know that over the time you're going to introduce new products, there's going to be new technologies that come in place, and of course there's going to be new customer scenarios that you want to address. And so there is this inherent tension between usability and flexibility. And then if you consider now efficiency versus fidelity, you want to be, of course, as effective and as efficient as possible to have a really quick POC up and running. And as such, maybe the easiest thing to do would be to have simulated resources and simulated workloads. But on the other hand, the customer's expectations are that what you're showing is as close to the real world as possible, and so that ideally you'd want to have the exact hardware that eventually the customer would purchase if we're talking about a hardware solution. And of course, in the middle, you can have any number of virtualized workloads that are used in place. And finally, the last axis of discussion is around power versus sustainability. So we're talking about sales SEs, and if you want your solution to be really sustainable in the long run and appeal to a large group of people who may not be programmers by nature, you want some system that's very, very simple to use, as opposed to, but in the same time, it might restrict you to do new things and limit your power that you would have if you had simply a developer you would rely on that would use DIY scripts on demand, but then that developer might become the bottleneck in your team if you want to automate everything. So now comes in place demo clouds. So demo clouds are trying to strike that balance and find the right approach here to accelerate and solve all those challenges. So what are demo clouds? We're talking about having a self-service portal, so many sales teams can access a demo at any given time on demand. And these demos will address all the most common scenarios that you would encounter at your customer. And then, of course, each customer demo has to be independent, and you don't want to have sales teams stepping on each other. So you need to provide some type of the demo cloud needs to provide some isolation between each demo environment. And on the other hand, you do want to have extremely rapid provisioning of those environments, whereas their hardware configuration or virtual workloads or a mix of both in sort of a hybrid situation. So you do want to have some ability to orchestrate automatically those workloads without having to recode and redevelop everything at once each time. And then, as you see on this little picture, you might have distributed teams across geographies. And of course, you do want to have a system that's ready to scale, knowing that the sales cycles are such that you will have peaks of demand depending on where you're at in the quarter and where you're at during the year. Some quarters are more conducive than others to customer demos. So you experience peaks of demands, and this demo cloud has to sort of support multiple sales teams all of a sudden wanting to access different resources and have these resources be available for that. And finally, you want to have some type of accountability against some metrics that you would want to identified of usage of certain equipment. So if an equipment is never used or a type of demo is never used, or on the other hand, if a demo is used extremely often by teams, you want to be able to track that and figure out who's been using what over time, and have a system that's able to report that to management when as needed, because this is again a solution that is something that everybody should be aware of and should see the value of. So that says there's all the companies, every company has their own processes in place. Many companies use Salesforce, for instance. So you want to have also a set of APIs that integrate with those types of systems so that seamlessly you have your leads integrated as well with those demos, and have the ability to have an end-to-end process that's automated. So that said, I'm going to now give the ball to Matt, who's going to tell us more about what you guys did at Broadcom. So Matt, the floor is yours.
So this story, Broadcom, actually started about 3 years ago under Brocade, and basically what we were looking for was a tool to help us with consolidating equipment, lab utilization, obviously, and you know, one of the I was partnered with an engineer, and he brought to me an important statistic that without something like CloudShell, the current lab utilization is around 5 to 10%, and that's mind-blowing. You know, you have all this equipment in a lab, and it's just sitting there not being used. And it's not that it's never going to be used. It's that, you know, let's just take, for instance, we have 12 engineers. They each want 2 switches hooked up however they want, but you know, each pair of switches, the engineer's only going to use it for maybe an hour a day during a month. And so suddenly you have maybe at any given time, either no switches being used, or maybe 2 switches being used out of an entire room of switches. And so what we were looking for was a system where we could have a smaller inventory, but a scheduling system that could allow people to go in and know when it's being scheduled and allow them to schedule their own demos around that 24/7 schedule. The other piece to this we were also looking for was the ability to, if we're going to have you know, instead of having 12 setups, we only have one. We want to be able to reset that at the end of each demo, so that the next person comes in, it's a clean setup. So what we found with CloudShell is that we were able to actually consolidate all of our demos onto one single pane of glass. And as you can see here, this is our current inventory of demos. It's about the same as what we started with, and we've definitely gone through several transitions at this point. But as you can see, it's a single pane of glass where the user can just go in, click, reserve their demo based on a time, and then they can enter their demo and at the time, their specified time, and do what they need to do. The other piece that we got out of this is that we got a very neat little piece where the instruction tab, it allows us to put all the information necessary to run that demo all on the same web page as the demo itself. And so you can go in, prep ahead of time, and then you have all of the information, the documentation, and the demo all at your fingertips, ready to go when you're ready to go in front of the customer. So through all of this, like I said, this story kind of started about 3 years ago under Brocade. We've now actually become, we were acquired by Broadcom, and now we've been able to actually essentially continue branching out to scale this out to not just you know, the more users, more demos, more environments, tie-in automation, but we're also able to now expand this out to engineering and support teams as well, and really, you know, turn this into what CloudShell, we feel CloudShell really is built for, which is it's a lab cloud, in a sense, where it's lab as a service, and you're able to provide users with exactly what they need in an expedited process and speed, while at the same time you're able to go in and maintain your lab with the automation, so you can keep the boxes, you know, you can maintain the demos in a good state, because generally before this, without even the automation, you'd have users going in, and don't get me wrong, sales guys are great. They're a great user, but half the time they're talking to the customer and they may forget to go reset the demo or reset the environment, and this will allow us to go in and keep the lab in a clean, maintained state.
All right, thanks, Matt. This is very insightful, and I'd like to now run a little demo of a demo in a way of how CloudShell can be used as a demo platform. So it will hopefully speak to you and be a bit more easier to grab. So here I'm a sales engineer, and I'm going to log on to my demo cloud. And as I'm signing in, I'm accessing a self-service catalog of demos that are ready for me to be used. And I'm just going to go ahead and select the demo. So let's say in this case, I'm demoing in front of potential telco companies, and I'm trying to sell some virtual application to do virtual CPE, essentially, an NFV solution. So here I'm selecting here my blueprints, and these blueprints, by the way, are very easy to use. They have complete set of instructions, as Matt mentioned. This is important. So you have instructions that can be actually configured for different users, and here you have what would be sort of the customer-facing instruction. Then I have my SE, my sales engineer instructions, and even the developer instructions. So these instructions can have multiple tabs, multiple views, depending on who you are. And then the other aspect of it is this blueprint is actually pretty easy to construct, even though it looks pretty complex with some components that are actually physical here. We have some physical equipment that are represented. We have some virtual equipment. We have some network segments. And we even have some network tools like IXload, breaking points, that are all on this map. But to build this blueprint didn't require too much effort. And all I did was, if I was the blueprint, the architect or the blueprint designer, would be just to drag and drop into this canvas an element here from my pretty fine catalog of applications and resources. So that says, I'm a sales engineer, everything is ready for me here to go. And all I'm going to do now is reserve that blueprint. And reserving this blueprint will essentially reserve all the physical equipment and deploy all the virtual equipment in the cloud of choice. So here I can even have some input parameters of the versions that I want to demonstrate, and maybe the cloud provider I want to show here. And here when I click reserve, the setup and the orchestration is now kicking in. And as this is going on here, really I don't have anything to do until everything is set up for me and automatically configured, which means provisioning of all those virtual machines in OpenStack here in this case, and then configuration, reservation of all those physical equipment. Here I even have some equipment that was picked from a pool of equipment that corresponds to requirements. And here I have also a health check indicator that tells me that this health check, this device is up and running, and when was this health check running. So I can look at the live stream of what's happening real time also. This is so the customer understands that this is not simulated, but everything is running real time. And so this gives me a real activity feed, essentially, of all the actions that are taken on this blueprint. And now what I'm going to do is, we won't wait for this to complete, but instead I'm going to go directly here to my deploy the sandbox, which I pre-deployed right before this, the start of this webinar. And here I have an active sandbox. So with this active sandbox, I can now show some actions, including running some tests. So let's say I want to show the customer the performance of my solution. I can go ahead and run a quick test here and start traffic. And essentially, this is what Matt was talking about, the single pane of glass experience. So I don't need to access any of those tools. I can just simply click on the command from here and run any of those equipment that have been pre-configured on my blueprint. So here, when I'm running traffic, now I can also get statistics automatically. So that's the other thing that I'll be able to do is automatically retrieve the results and show the customer that I have a report about whatever test was run on my equipment, and have sort of a very convincing story about how effective my solution is. So the other thing that you're able to do with this is you're able to run additional commands that are going to be completed on the entire sandbox, or if you want to also resume your work at a later time, because sometimes those POCs, they can take multiple days. you can just snapshot everything and then decide to restore that sandbox at a later time. So that would be another option that you would be able to do through a simple orchestration command. And then finally, one other thing that you can do, if need be, also is to access any of those equipment directly from the sandbox. So if I wanted to go ahead and access this equipment, I can go ahead and SSH to it, and I will directly get onto the console of that device. So finally, the last step, and something also I wanted to mention, is that the networking here of these of this layout here has been done automatically behind the scenes. So here I have automatically got some VLAN segments configured, layer 2 segments, and even layer 1 segments configured between those devices as part of the orchestration. So finally, when I'm done with this demo, all I need to do now is either let the time expire, or I can just end this sandbox. And the important step is, when you end the sandbox, it's not just ending the demo, it's also resetting all the equipment and deleting those virtual machines so you don't have anything left over. And the equipment that you were using for the demo is now available for the next salesperson to run their demo. So that kind of gives you a simple overview of the CloudShell platform and how it can be used in the context of this demo cloud. So now I'm going to go back to our presentation. And let's do a quick wrap-up of the benefits of Demo Cloud. So one of the main aspects of Demo Cloud is really to accelerate the sales process through the use of automation and the use of scheduling and on-demand self-service demos, instead of having to configure every single one of them as a sort of a custom work item, a custom project. The second aspect of it is being more efficient in the use of resources. So any equipment now doesn't need to be shipped, it's going to be shared, and it's much more cost effective. You need less of that equipment. If Matt mentioned the story about having all those racks of equipment, now you can use just one instead of 12 maybe switches, or you could also, if you're using any cloud resource, you'd be able to use and consume only specific resources when you need them for the duration of the demo, and then they would get deleted at the end. The other aspect of it that is an additional, I would say, benefit once you get your demo cloud up and running is the fact that you can scale your sales initiatives by using this demo cloud to educate your channels and empower them to actually run demos for you. So you can give them access to those demos, and since they're very simple to use, very intuitive, you don't need to have really long training for them. You have the ability to get them up and running on your solution and also let them run demos themselves. And finally, if you have a number of technology partners that are going to be involved as well to help you out in this process, this is also a vehicle for you to help those partners get them and running and use these as a training, this demo cloud as a training platform. So if you want to learn more about this, you can go visit our website at www.quali.com and ask for a technical demo. You can also download some white paper and solution briefs on the topic if you go into our resource center. This presentation will be available for anyone who registered for this webinar. So the link will be sent out, and you'll be able to access all those pages from there. And that said, I'm going to now, and the recording also will be available. So I'm going to move on now to Q&A, and let's see. I think we have a number of prepared Q&A already that I saw coming in during the presentation. So the first one might be for you, Matt. How long did it take you to get up and running with CloudShell?
So that's actually a multifaceted question. To actually get the server up and running, it's actually very fast and easy once you have the application, of course. The real power behind this is how fast can you get your resources into the system, and that really comes down to being able to document your demos, being able to document, having a well-documented inventory. And obviously that's always kind of a work in progress.
Yeah, know what you have, right?
Exactly,
Mm-hmm.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, from an automation and inventory standpoint, it also comes down to how accurate it is, right?
Right, exactly.
So obviously coming from, after, learning all of this, I'm coming at it from a, let's have 150% accuracy here.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously you can't get that, but,
yeah.
So yeah, I think it took us about 2 to 3 months to finally get up and be able to at least initially have a initial offering to our sales teams, and then it was just a kind of a slow carrot and stick kind of process where we'd offer the demos and present the demos and evangelize, while at the same time start to kind of shut down all the other labs. I think when we first started at Brocade, we had something like anywhere from, I think it was 35 different labs. And as we've gone through this process, as each lab kind of didn't get utilized, we kind of were able to shut it down and consolidate. And obviously that's been a whole process in and of itself. And then of course we got acquired by Broadcom, and we went through that process again.
Yeah.
And at this point, when I'm able to sit here and have, 5 racks of gear that's able to service, 200 sales engineers right here, right now, that's power right there.
All right. And actually that's maybe another leading question to that is, how did you manage to convince users to adopt the new platform, knowing that it's always disruptive, right? You have your own ways, and how did you do that?
Again, it was a mix of evangelizing versus the labs shutting down, no longer having access to equipment, but, oh, by the way, here's a quick, easy web browser. Click, you're in the demo, you have easy access to show the customer, and oh, by the way, the demo resets at the end of it, so you don't even have to worry about it. You just reserve and do the job that you're getting paid for, right, which is to sell the customer. You can actually focus on that rather than have to go in each time and validate that the demo is operational and spend hours and hours trying to get used to this thing. Because obviously, if you're not using something like CloudShell, you're usually going to someone who has a lab and say, "Can I borrow your equipment?" Yeah. Which is more of a sandbox, and you have to go build your demo yourself, and it takes time. Whereas here, it's just click, reserve, and you're in.
All right, and so talking about building those environments, or as much as you can, how much customization did you have to do versus stuff that you got out of the box with the platform?
The wonderful thing we found with CloudShell is that we found that it creates that platform where we can sit there and say, here's, very quickly spin up the demo. Honestly, most of the customization is really around the specific resets that each demo requires. Generally speaking, because each demo is unique in and of itself, and it's going to require its own unique set of resets. But even with that, as we started to standardize our automation, even being able to just attach pre-built shells to each specific environment, and then just maybe add a little command as part of the shell to say, look, if you're this demo, run this command. And suddenly we're able to just start attaching shells to our pre-built automated shells to our resources, and suddenly we can have one shell for multiple demos rather than just each individual reset for each demo.
All right, excellent. So I don't have any more questions, but I want to thank you, Matt, for participating in this webinar.
Happy to be here.
It was really insightful. And again, we thank everyone for attending as well. We will be sending the recording of this webinar, and feel free to reach out if you need more information. Thank you.